The summons arrived at dawn, carried by 3 wolves in their human skins and dressed in the black leather of the Iron Maw pack. They did not knock. They walked through the door of my father's in the way storms walk through open fields, as if walls were suggestions and locks were polite jokes. I was behind the bar, wiping down the counter with a cloth that had seen better decades, when the tallest one set a rolled scroll on the wood in front of me. Black wax seal, silver embossed crest, a wolf devouring a crescent moon. My stomach dropped before my eyes finished reading. Mara Voss, the tall one said. He had pale eyes, the kind that had looked at violence so often they'd stopped reacting to it. By decree of King Aldrich of Ironmaw, you are summoned to the pack seat of Vordenmoor. You will present yourself at the king's hall before the next full moon. Refusal is not a recognized option. He said the last part like he'd said it many times before, like it was printed on the inside of his eyelids, and he recited it in his sleep. I looked at the scroll. I looked at him. I looked at the 2 others flanking him, both with their arms crossed and their eyes doing the slow circuit of the room that predators do when they've already decided they own the space. You have the wrong woman, I said. We have the right woman, Pale Eyes said. The lorekeeper confirmed it. You are Mara Voss, daughter of Henrik Voss, granddaughter of Ilse the Twice-Marked. You bear the crescent scar on your left wrist. I pressed my left wrist flat against my thigh. The king requires you, he said. The terms of the decree are enclosed. You have 3 days to settle your affairs. He turned and walked out. The other 2 followed. The door swung shut behind them and hung crooked in its frame, the latch broken. My father came out of the kitchen. He'd heard everything. He was a big man, Henrik Voss, broad across the shoulders with hands that could split firewood with one swing, and right now those hands were shaking. Mara, he said. Don't, I held up one hand. Don't tell me it was always going to happen. Don't tell me the prophecy is real. I won't. He sat down heavily on the stool nearest the bar, but you already know that it is. I did know. I'd known since I was 7 years old, the morning my grandmother pressed her thumb to the inside of my left wrist and said, quietly and without ceremony, that I was the one the old songs talked about, the one born under the bleed moon with the mark of the crescent on her skin, the one who would walk into the den of the Wolf King and not walk out the same. I'd spent my whole life trying to forget that conversation. I'd been fairly successful right up until this morning. I unrolled the scroll. The language was formal and dense, the kind that lawyers and kings use when they want the words to feel inevitable. But the meaning was plain enough. Aldrich of Ironmaw, king of the northern packs, had invoked the ancient law of binding. Under that law, older than any living memory, older than any current border, the prophesied mate of a pack king could be summoned, and the union sealed within 30 days. At the bottom of the page, in handwriting that was surprisingly plain for a king's hand, come willingly. I have no interest in drama. I stared at that line for a long time. He signed it himself, I said. My father nodded. He looked like a man watching the horizon for something he'd been dreading his whole life. What do you know about him? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. What everyone knows. He took the Ironmaw throne at 19 after his father died in the border wars. He consolidated 6 packs under one banner in 4 years. They call him brutal because he is. They call him fair because he is that too when it suits him. He paused. They say he doesn't smile. Good, I said. Neither do I lately. I was packed by noon and on the road by mid-afternoon, riding the old gray mare my father had pressed on me with a set jaw and wet eyes he refused to acknowledge. I didn't look back. Looking back was a luxury for people who had choices. The road to Vordenmoor took 2.5 days through the kind of country that doesn't apologize for itself, black pine forests and granite ridgelines and rivers that ran fast and cold and didn't care about your schedule. It was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. You could admire it as long as you kept moving. I arrived at the gates of Vordenmoor on the morning of the third day, cold to the bone and smelling like horse and pine smoke. The city was larger than I'd expected, built into the side of a mountain like it had grown there rather than been constructed, all dark stone and steep angles and windows that caught the light at odd moments and threw it back unexpectedly. The guards at the outer gate were expecting me. Of course they were. I was taken not to a guest chamber but directly to the throne room, which told me everything I needed to know about how this king operated. He wanted to see me before I'd had the chance to wash or rest or compose myself. It was a dominance move, and a transparent one, and I resented it in principle even as I understood the logic. The throne room was enormous and cold and lit by torches that threw shadows in every direction. The ceiling was vaulted stone, carved with wolves in mid-hunt, frozen in the moment before the kill. The floor was black marble that rang under my boots like a struck bell. He was already there. I'd expected a throne. There was a throne high-backed, dark wood, carved with the same crescent moon-devouring wolf as the seal. But he wasn't in it. He was standing to the left of it, arms crossed, watching me walk the length of the room. Aldrich of Ironmaw was not what I'd pictured. I'd pictured older somehow, grayer, more worn. The word asterisk brutal conjures something battered and blunt. He was none of those things. He was perhaps 30, with the kind of face that mountains have, all clean lines and no softness, and an absolute refusal to explain itself. Dark hair, dark eyes, a scar running from his left temple to his jaw that had healed cleanly, which told you something about wolf healing and also something about the kind of fight that had left a mark at all. He looked at me the way someone looks at a problem they've been thinking about for a long time, not dismissively, not hungrily, more like an engineer regards a structure that needs to hold weight. Mara Voss, he said. His voice was lower than I expected, even. King Aldrich. I stopped walking at a distance I chose, not a distance anyone had indicated, a small thing. He noticed it. You came alone, he said. Your men broke my father's door. Traveling with an escort seemed like it would give you the wrong impression about whose side they were on. Something moved behind his eyes, not amusement exactly, recognition maybe. You read the decree, he said. I read it. Then you understand the situation. I understand that you've invoked a law that hasn't been used in 3 generations to compel a woman to marry you, I said. I understand the broad outline of the situation, yes. A long pause. A torch popped and hissed somewhere to my left. The law is legitimate, he said. I didn't say it wasn't. You're angry. I'm cold and I'm tired, and I rode for 3 days on a horse that favors her left foreleg, I said. Angry is somewhere in there too, yes. Another pause. He looked at me steadily. I looked back. Neither of us moved. I didn't choose the prophecy, he said finally, not as an apology, as a fact. Neither did I said. He uncrossed his arms. It was the first thing he'd done that felt like a concession of any kind, however small. There are chambers prepared for you. Clean clothes, food, rest. We'll speak more tomorrow. We'll speak more now, I said. I'd rather be uncomfortable and informed than comfortable and ignorant. He studied me for a moment. Then, without any particular ceremony, he walked to the throne and sat down. He gestured to a chair that had been placed, I now noticed, to the left of the throne at a right angle to it, not in front of it where a petitioner would stand. Beside it. I said, the lorekeeper believes the union must occur before the next full moon, he said. That gives us 19 days. Why the full moon? The prophecy specifies it. The crescent-marked mate must be bound before the bleed moon rises or the binding loses its power. He said it without inflection, the way you recite facts you've verified and would prefer to be otherwise. What power? I asked. He looked at me directly. The Ironmaw throne is contested, Has been since my father died. There are 3 other pack leaders who believe they have a better claim than I do. 2 of them are willing to test that claim with force." He paused. "The prophecy says the crescent-marked mate will secure the throne, that her presence will end the challenge. The loremasters of 4 packs have confirmed the same reading." I sat with that. "So you need me," I said, "not as a wife, as a symbol." "Both," he said, without any attempt to soften it. "You'd be both." I studied him. He wasn't trying to charm me. He wasn't performing warmth he didn't feel. He was laying out the reality with an efficiency that was either deeply respectful or deeply cold, and I hadn't decided yet which. "What do I get out of it?" I asked. He blinked, just once. I think it was the first time I'd surprised him. "Protection," he said. "For you and your father, resources. A position that carries real authority within the pack. I'm not interested in a ceremonial arrangement." He paused. "And I give you my word that I will never use force or compulsion in anything beyond what the ceremony itself requires." "Your word," I said. "It's the most valuable thing I own," he said, not proudly, simply. I thought about my father's shaking hands. I thought about the broken door. I thought about the road through the black pine forest and the cold that had settled in my bones 3 days ago and hadn't left. I thought about my grandmother pressing her thumb to my wrist when I was 7 and saying, "The old songs are not stories, child. They are instructions." 19 days, I said. 19 days. Then we should stop wasting them. The first week was an education in the difference between what people say about a man and what he actually is. They said Aldrich was brutal. What I saw was a man who made hard decisions without flinching and didn't pretend they were easy. I watched him settle 3 pack disputes in 2 days, and each time he cut through the noise to the actual problem with the kind of precision that wasn't brutality, it was clarity. Brutality doesn't care about getting it right. Clarity does. They said he didn't smile. That part was accurate. They said the pack feared him. What I saw was something more complicated, a pack that had been formed from 6 separate loyalties, each with its own history and grievance and pride, and was still in the process of becoming one thing. The fear was real, but it was the fear that comes with newness, with not knowing yet whether to trust. It wasn't the fear of cruelty. I didn't learn all of this by watching from a distance. I learned it because Aldrich, true to his word, gave me a position with actual function. I was placed on the Dispute Mediation Council, not as a figurehead, as a voice. The pack's lorekeeper, an elderly woman named Sage Bryn, who smelled permanently of dried herbs and old paper, and had the eyes of someone who had outlived every assumption she'd ever made, explained why on my second morning. "The crescent-marked mate's role in the prophecy isn't decorative," she told me. We were in her study, which was essentially a very sophisticated system of organized chaos, every surface covered in scrolls and bound volumes and small carved objects whose purpose I couldn't guess. "The old songs say she doesn't just asterisk secure the throne. She completes the king. What he cannot see, she sees. What he cannot reach, she reaches." That sounds like a very poetic way of saying he needs someone to do the things he's bad at, I said. Sage Bryn smiled. She had a wonderful smile, the kind that had been used mostly to acknowledge things other people refused to acknowledge. "That is exactly what it means," she said. "He is strong where strength is required and entirely without range in the areas where strength is useless. You, from what I've observed in 48 hours, are precisely the opposite." "You've been watching me for 48 hours. "I've been watching for you for 30 years, she said pleasantly. 48 hours is nothing." I thought about that on the walk back to my chambers. I thought about it during the evening meal, which Aldrich and I ate together, not by any explicit arrangement, but because we'd both arrived in the great hall at the same time, and neither of us had found a compelling reason to sit elsewhere. We didn't talk much during meals in those early days, but I noticed things. The way he ate quickly and without attention, the way someone eats who has spent years treating food as fuel rather than pleasure. The way he listened to his packmates who came to speak with him fully, without distraction, and then gave answers that were brief and didn't require follow-up questions. The way he held himself, always slightly apart, even in a room full of people who deferred to him. On the fourth evening I said, without particular preamble, "When did you last sleep a full night?" He looked up from his plate. "Why?" "You have the eyes of someone running on about 5 hours. I'm curious how long that's been going on." A pause. "A few years," he said. "Since you took the throne." "Before, actually." He returned to his food. Then, as if the sentence had found its way out of him without his full authorization, "Since my father died." I didn't push. I filed it away. On the 6th day, one of the pack leaders arrived. His name was Dorek, and he led the Ashfang pack to the east, and he was one of the two who had been making noises about the throne. He was a large man with a wrestler's build and a politician's smile, and the eyes of someone who had decided the world was a transaction and was waiting to find out the price. He arrived with 12 of his wolves and a great deal of expansive charm, and he looked at me the way someone evaluates a piece on a game board, assessing value, calculating use. "So this is the prophesied mate," he said. "At the welcoming feast Aldrich was obligated to provide by the laws of hospitality." He was looking at me but speaking to the room. "I expected something more. Marked." "The scar is on my wrist," I said pleasantly. "Not my face. Were you hoping for something more theatrical?" A ripple ran around the tables. Dorek's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went flat. "Spirited," he said. "Accurate," I said. "There's a difference." Aldrich beside me said nothing, but under the table his hand closed briefly around my wrist, not the scarred one, the other, and then released. A signal, not a rebuke. Something closer to asterisk noted and well done compressed into a half-second of contact. It was the first time he'd touched me. Later, when the feast had wound down and Dorek and his wolves were installed in the guest quarters, I found Aldrich in the corridor outside the great hall. He was standing at a window that looked out over the city, the torchlight making shadows of his expression. "He'll make a move before the ceremony," he said. He wasn't talking to me exactly, more thinking aloud in my presence, which felt like a different kind of trust. "Yes," I said. "He'll try to discredit the binding, claim the prophecy doesn't apply, or that the identification is false, or that the law of binding is procedurally invalid. He's going to go through the loremaster's records looking for a crack." He turned to look at me. "How do you know?" "Because he's not a fighter, he's a lawyer." He had 3 different conversations tonight where he was very casually asking very precise questions about the legal basis for the ceremony. He was building a case. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. "I'll have Sage Bryn prepare documentation." "Already asked her this afternoon," I said. "She's compiling it." He looked at me with that same look he'd had in the throne room on the first day, the one that wasn't quite recognition, but was adjacent to it. Like he was recalibrating something. "You didn't come here to be managed," he said. "No," I said. "I came here because I didn't have a choice, but as long as I'm here I'm going to be useful." A pause. The torchlight moved between us. "Go to sleep," he said. "You look exhausted." "So do you," I said. "I'm accustomed to it." "That doesn't make it sustainable." I turned to leave. "Good night, Aldrich." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Good night, Mara." It was the first time he'd used my name without the formality of the full name. I didn't make a thing of it. I carried it back to my room like a small coal I didn't want to drop. The second week was harder. Dorek found his crack. Not in the loremaster's records. Sage Bryn had shored those up admirably. But in an older document, a charter from 400 years ago that contained a clause about the crescent-marked mate, and a secondary requirement that nobody had thought to look at in 300 years. The mate had to be *willing. Not just present, not just bound, willing. The charter specified it in language that was archaic but clear. The binding had no power if the marked one came under compulsion. The prophecy's protection of the throne required genuine consent. Doric brought this to the council with the visible delight of a man who has been waiting a long time for exactly this moment. Under the law of binding as invoked, he said smoothly to the assembled pack elders, the mate was summoned by decree, by compulsion. The decree specifically stated that refusal was not an option. He looked at me. Can she truly claim willing consent under those circumstances? The room was very quiet. I could feel Aldrich beside me, completely still. He had the stillness of someone holding something very heavy very carefully. I stood up. I'd like to answer that, I said. Doric spread his hands generously. By all means. I looked at him for a moment. Then I looked at the assembled elders, wolves from 6 different packs, all of them watching me with the particular attention of people who understand that something important is being decided. I was summoned by decree, I said. That's true. I was told refusal was not an option. Also true. I rode here alone on a horse with a bad leg for 3 days without anyone forcing me to. I paused. I've been here for 11 days. I haven't left. I have had 11 days worth of opportunities to walk out that gate and I haven't taken one of them. I paused again. Either I'm the least perceptive prisoner in the history of this pack's hospitality, or I'm here because I've decided to be here. I let that sit. The decree brought me to the door, I said. I walked through it myself. Doric opened his mouth. I kept going. And I'd further note, I said, that the charter's language around willingness is about the state of consent at the time of binding, not at the time of summons. The ceremony hasn't occurred yet. Whether I am willing at the time of the ceremony is the only question the charter asks. I looked at him steadily. Are you planning to be present at the ceremony, Lord Doric? Because if you are, you'll have your answer then. The silence that followed was the kind that has a texture to it, a density. Doric's political smile was still in place, but it had gone thin, a paper smile over a colder architecture. The Elder Council voted to dismiss the challenge, 14-2. Afterward in the corridor, Aldrich stopped walking. I stopped beside him. That was, he said, and then paused, as if searching for the right word and finding it in an unexpected drawer. That was exactly right. I know, I said. He looked at me sideways. The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't a smile exactly, but it was the closest thing to one I'd seen on his face in 11 days, and it hit me somewhere below the sternum with a force I wasn't entirely prepared for. You're going to be very difficult to be married to, he said. Yes, I said. You should have thought about that before you sent the decree. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, low, brief, surprised out of him. I decided I would collect those sounds the way other people collect rare things. The 3rd week was when everything changed. It began with a sound in the night, not an unusual sound, in a pack seat that housed 300 wolves. Footsteps, a door, the distant echo of raised voices. I'd been sleeping lightly since I arrived, the way you sleep in a place that isn't yours yet. But this was different. This was the specific quality of silence that follows sudden violence. I was dressed and in the corridor in 2 minutes. 3 of Aldrich's guard wolves were outside my door, which told me the disturbance was real and proximate. They didn't try to send me back inside, which told me they'd learned something in 3 weeks. Where? I said. The king's study, the nearest one said. She was young, perhaps 20, with the tight expression of someone trying to present competence over fear. I went. The study was on the floor above, and I could hear voices before I reached it, Aldrich's, flat and controlled, and another I recognized. Doric. The door was open. 2 of Doric's wolves were inside, and 2 of Aldrich's, and Aldrich was standing in the center of the room with blood on his shirt. a cut across his forearm that had already nearly closed. Dorek was by the window, his elaborate composure mostly intact but cracking at the edges. An accident, Dorek was saying as I entered. My wolf mistook the study for his own chambers, in the dark. In the dark, Aldrich said, your wolf drew a blade. The room went still when I came in. Dorek looked at me. Something shifted in his eyes, calculation, reassessment. Myra, Aldrich said, not a greeting, a warning. I ignored it. I walked past him to the small side table where the evidence was visible if you knew what you were looking at, a small clay bottle, uncorked, the kind a physician carries. Except this one smelled of copper and something beneath copper, something that made the inside of my nose burn. I picked it up. Everyone in the room watched me. Wolfsbane derivative, I said, but modified, slower onset, less detectable. You'd feel it as fatigue first, then disorientation. I looked at Dorek. Delivered how? The blade, or was there a backup plan for the water? Dorek's composure shattered. It was fast, efficient, the way well-built things break all at once. You have no proof. I have a bottle, I said. I have your wolf in this room with a drawn blade. I have a king with a cut that would have delivered a dose if the blade had been properly coated. I set the bottle down carefully. I have 19 years of watching my father run an inn, which means I have 19 years of watching people lie and knowing exactly what it looks like. I turned to Aldrich's guards. Detain Lord Dorek and his wolves pending formal investigation, I said. Under Pack Law, Article 4, Section 2, attempted harm to a pack king during a period of formal visitation. I paused. Sage Bryn can confirm the citation. Nobody moved for exactly 2 seconds. Then Aldrich said quietly, do it. Dorek left the room in custody. His wolves followed. The door closed. Aldrich and I were alone in the study. He looked at the bottle on the table. He looked at his arm, the cut already sealed to a thin red line. He looked at me. How did you know the citation? He asked. I've been reading Pack Law for 2 weeks, I said. Sage Bryn has been lending me volumes. You've been reading Pack Law. I told you I wanted to be useful. I crossed my arms. How bad is the cut? Shallow. The blade wasn't coated. The plan must have been the water. Then you're fine. Yes, he was quiet for a moment. Mara. Don't, I said. I was going to say thank you. I looked at him. In the low light of the study, with blood on his shirt and the exhaustion he always carried looking a little closer to the surface than usual, he looked like a person rather than a position. Like a man who had been holding weight for a very long time and had just, for one moment, felt some of it ease. You're welcome, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and stood in front of me, close enough that I could see the exact shade of his eyes in the torchlight, dark brown, not black as I'd first thought, and he took my left hand and turned it over slowly and looked at the scar on my wrist. The crescent, the thing that had started all of this. I didn't choose this, he said very quietly, but I find that I'm glad it happened. My heart did something complicated and undignified. I let it. That might be the closest you've come to saying something that isn't entirely strategic, I said. He looked up from my wrist. I'm capable of non-strategic statements. Prove it. A pause, the torchlight between us. You're the most formidable person I've ever put a chair next to a throne for, he said. I laughed. It came out before I could catch it, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind I hadn't had since before the wolves walked through my father's door. He looked startled by it. Then something in his face did the thing it had been doing in small increments for 3 weeks, something settling into place, a lock finding a tumbler. He didn't smile, but his eyes did. 4 days, he said, then the ceremony. 4 days, I agreed. He hadn't let go of my hand. Neither of us mentioned it. The 4 days before the ceremony were the strangest of my life, Not because they were difficult, but because they weren't. Dorek was in custody. The second challenger, a pack leader named Vorn who had been watching the situation from a careful distance, sent a formal message of non-contestation. The legal ground had been cleared. The path to the ceremony was open. And Aldrich and I, for the first time since I'd arrived, had nothing to navigate together except each other. We walked the city. His idea, though he presented it as a practical tour, showing me the structures of governance, the markets, the outer districts. I saw through that immediately and didn't say so, because I was doing the same thing, presenting my company as strategic information gathering rather than preference. I learned things about him in those 4 days that I hadn't learned in the preceding 2 weeks of crisis management. I learned that he was genuinely curious about how things worked, not in the political sense, but in the physical sense, the mechanics of things. He stopped at a blacksmith's forge for 20 minutes to watch a blade being tempered, asking questions with the focused attention of a much younger person. I learned that he had a streak of dry humor he kept behind his teeth like a coin he wasn't sure was currency. I learned that the sleeplessness had started the night his father died, that he'd sat by the body until dawn waiting for something he couldn't name, and that since then sleep had been a room he could enter but not stay in. I told him things in return, about my grandmother, about the crescent scar and what it had been like to carry it from the age of 7, not with dread exactly, but with a peculiar awareness, like knowing a letter is coming for you but not knowing when it will arrive or what it will say. "Were you frightened?" he asked. We were on the western wall, looking out at the mountain and the last colors of a winter sunset. "Of the prophecy. Of me." I thought about it honestly. I was frightened of what you represented, the loss of choice, being a symbol rather than a person. I paused. I was waiting for you to confirm those fears. "And you haven't," I said. "You've been inconveniently different from what I expected." He was quiet for a moment. The wind off the mountain was sharp and cold and smelled of pine and stone. "I was told you would come and that you would change things," he said. "I didn't know what that meant. I thought it meant the throne challenge, political stability. And now..." He looked at me. For once he didn't weigh the words before he released them. "Now I think it means something else entirely." I held his gaze. "You should tell me what you mean." "I mean that I spent 4 years building something I couldn't hold alone and refusing to know it." He paused. "I mean that I've slept 4 hours a night for 6 years, and I slept 7 hours last night." Something moved through me, not softness exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that had been waiting at the edge of my awareness for days and had just walked through the door. "Aldrich," I said. "I know," he said quietly. "I know what I'm saying." "Good," I said, "because I need you to keep saying it." The corner of his mouth moved, the almost smile, the one I had been collecting. "After the ceremony," he said. "Agreed," I said. We stood on the wall until the sun finished setting and the first stars came out, shoulder to shoulder, looking at the same mountain. It didn't feel like a forced arrangement. It didn't feel like a prophecy being fulfilled. It felt like two people who had found, against most reasonable expectations, that they fit. The morning of the ceremony was cold and clear, the kind of winter day that has no mercy and no pretensions. I dressed in the pack colors, deep green and silver, the same shades as the mountains in certain lights, and Sage Bryn came to do the ceremonial marks, small painted symbols on my wrists and collarbone that the tradition required. She worked quietly, with the focused attention she brought to everything. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like myself," I said, and it was true. I'd expected to feel stripped or subsumed or diminished walking into this. I felt none of those things. I felt like a person who has been moving toward something for a very long time and has finally arrived. "Good," Sage Bryn said. She capped her brush. "That's exactly how you should feel." The great hall was full. All 6 pack leaders were present. Vorn with his non-contestation and his careful eyes, the four who had been aligned with Aldrich from the start, and the space where Dorek would have stood, now conspicuously empty. 300 wolves and the loremasters of 4 territories and the echoing stone ceiling with its carved wolves frozen in the moment before the kill. Aldrich was already at the front of the hall when I walked in. He was in the pack colors too, deep green and silver and black, and he was standing straight and still and watching me walk the length of the room with an expression that had nothing strategic in it, nothing political. It was the expression of a man who is seeing something that matters to him and is not hiding that it does. I stopped beside him. "You're not supposed to look at me like that before the ceremony," I said very quietly. "I'm not aware of a rule against it," he said, equally quiet. "There isn't one. I just wanted to note that I see you doing it." "Noted," he said, and this time fully and without reservation he smiled. It was a revelation. Not because it was magnificent. It was a small, private smile, the kind that belongs to a single person in a single moment, but because it was real. I understood that it was rare, that he had been keeping it behind those careful teeth for years, that what I was seeing was something nobody else in this room had seen. I filed it away, not like a coin, like something I planned to earn many more times. The ceremony was older than any architecture in the hall. The loremaster of the oldest pack conducted it, a woman named Reeve who spoke the old language with the cadence of someone who had spoken it since before she could read it, who carried the words in her body rather than her memory. She bound our wrists with a cord of braided silver and spoke the words and asked the question. "Does the crescent mark come willing?" I looked at Aldrich, he looked at me. "She comes willing," I said. The cord burned warm for a moment, not painfully, but with the specific warmth of something that has been waiting for a long time to become real. The crescent scar on my wrist flared silver and then settled. Sage Bryn, watching from the side, let out a breath I don't think she'd been aware she was holding. It was done. The hall erupted not in chaos but in something that sounded like relief, like 300 people exhaling something they had been carrying. Vorn, in the front row, bowed his head formally. The 4 aligned pack leaders were on their feet. Even the guards at the door, who were supposed to be professionally expressionless, had expressions. Aldrich turned to me. In the noise and the movement and the torchlight, with his people around him and the throne behind him and 6 packs worth of fractious history finally, for this moment, pointing in the same direction, he looked at me and said, quietly enough that only I could hear it, "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "We have a pack to run." "We," he said, not a question, a recognition. "We," I confirmed. He took my hand, not the ceremonial grip, just his hand around mine, warm and deliberate, and turned to face the hall. The spring came fast that year, the way it does in mountain country when it finally decides to arrive, sudden green meltwater running in every channel, the air losing its edge. The city woke up. The pack woke up. The challenges to the throne dissolved one by one, each in its own way. Dorek was tried and stripped of his leadership under pack law. Vorn came formally to negotiate an alliance that he wanted more than he'd admitted. The last holdout simply stopped holding out, his position untenable without allies. Aldrich slept 7 hours, then 8. He stopped carrying himself like a man waiting for the next crisis. I took my seat on the mediation council and used it. I started a correspondence with the loremasters of 3 territories on the question of how old laws should be read in new circumstances. I made enemies among the wolves who preferred the old arrangement and friends among the ones who'd been waiting for something to shift. My father came in early spring, at my invitation, riding a better horse than the gray mare. He was escorted in with more ceremony than he'd been expecting, and handled it with the dignity of a man who has been underestimated his whole life and has simply gotten accustomed to it. He and Aldrich sat together the first evening after dinner, while I was occupied with Sage Bryn and a stack of pack records. I learned later from my father that Aldrich had asked him what I'd been like as a child. My father had apparently talked for 2 hours. When I asked Aldrich what had been said, he looked at me with those dark eyes that had nothing hidden in them anymore, had stopped hiding things somewhere in the third week, and never started again, and said, "He told me you used to sit on the roof of the inn at night and look at the stars, that you used to say there was something out there with your name on it." "I was 7, I said. "He said you said it every night for 3 years. I was quiet for a moment. I stopped saying it when my grandmother died. It seemed, I paused, it seemed dangerous to want something that specific. "And now?" he asked. I looked at him, the man who didn't smile and then did, the man who slept 4 hours and then ate, the man who had laid out the hard terms of an arrangement with no attempt to dress them up, and then, in the space of 19 days, stopped being an arrangement. "Now I think the thing with my name on it wasn't what I thought it was," I said. "I thought it was a destiny, a role, a function." I paused. "It turned out to be a person." He was quiet for a moment. Then, without any ceremony, "Yes," he said, "it did." Outside, the spring moved through the mountains. The meltwater ran in all the channels, and the pines smelled of sap and new growth, and the city that had been built into the mountain like it had grown there, dark stone, steep angles, windows that caught the light at odd moments, was alive in a way that cities are when the thing that's been wrong with them for years has quietly been made right. I sat beside my husband in the last of the evening light, and the old songs were still running somewhere in the back of my bones, but they had stopped being instructions. They had become, at last, a record of something that had already happened,